Now, a group of more than 80 civil society organizations have raised their concerns about the looming end of the 350 Rand COVID-19 social relief of distress grant on the caregiver grant of 500 Rand. The Pay the Grants campaign is proposing that both grants be increased to 585 Rand per month and be extended for at least another 5 months. For more on this, I'm joined by SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi to tell us a little bit more. So, Tatu Vavi, I believe that you are echoing the sentiments of the Nedlek community constituency that's requesting that this be extended. Now, this was, of course, announced under the national state of disaster, and an allocation of about 11 or so billion rands was made available as a budget. Now, one would ask, if we're extending it, where is that money going to come from?
Well, thank you. This is not just about a SAFTU call. This is about a call made by over 80 civil society working class formations that have signed the petition calling on the government to extend the payment of these special grants that were issued in response to the COVID-19 epidemic that have undoubtedly pushed millions more of South Africans deeper into poverty. You will be aware that we've lost 2.2 million jobs in this period, just in 3 months between March and June. And that means that if our theory, in fact, it's not our theory, every statistic that was ever done tells us that every black worker supports between 1 and 15 dependents. If you talk 2.2 million job losses, then you should be talking about millions more people who have been pushed deeper into levels of poverty. The call made by these 80 civil society organizations is absolutely legitimate in the context of the fact that if the government was to go ahead and stop paying these grants at the end of October, millions of our people will be pushed deeper into poverty and squalor. And that's why we're making this passionate appeal to the government to extend the payment, because COVID is not over. There seems to be a second wave of COVID if you look at the latest figures. Poverty have not come to an end. Unemployment is deepening. There's no reason whatsoever to just leave so many millions of our people in the lurch. As to where that money is going to be coming from, we have from SAFTU over and over repeated the point that there is over 2 trillion rands in investable cash that is in the back pockets of the 0.1% of the population that is basically owning almost everything moving in the country. We have made a call on government to think very carefully about the need to introduce a wealth tax, a solidarity tax. There's about 400 billion rands that leaves this country through illicit financial outflows. Stopping that outflow will give us lots of money that we need. There's about 35 to 40% of our procurement budget being lost to tender fraud. Stopping that will bring 250 billion rands annually to the fiscus. And there's tax dodging schemes that amount to billions and billions of rands. If government was to just do those few things, it will find out that it has not just money to pay the peanuts of 585 rands that we are calling for to be extended for the next 5 years, but that it can afford to introduce a fully blown basic income grant. SAFTU says that basic income grant must be no less than 1,500, which will just be about 100 rands or so above the poverty line.
All right, Tatu Vavi, joining us also supporting this call is the former public protector, and now she is the social justice chair at the University of Stellenbosch. Advocate Madonsela, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us as well on the line. We are having this conversation and the call by the 80 civil society organizations being made at a time when the cupboards are bare, to use the words of the finance minister. There is no pot of gold, there is no money. How do you suggest government intervenes?
Thank you for the privilege. Good evening to everyone. Yes, there is no pot of gold or pot of money. However, human solidarity and Ubuntu demand that we don't leave anyone behind. And therefore, this money must be found. And it can be found. We've just heard from my colleague, Zwelinzima, talking about where waste is currently. The Auditor General just gave us a similar report about wastage. And therefore, we can pull back some money from corruption. We can pull back some money from fraud. We can also pull back some money from overbilling and overpayment, as well as false billing by government. And that's a lot of money that can be taken back. Just look at what has happened to PPEs. If you had asked for that money and said you needed to give this money for a grant, government would have said there's no money. But that money was available for overbilling.
Yeah. Now, what are the key
If you look at
challenges
the countries...
what are the key concerns, sorry, Advocate, in the introduction of a grant of this nature is whether or not it would be successful in reaching the vulnerable households. Now, I know you've made a point of saying that we shouldn't withdraw this grant because it will be asking women and girls in particular of South Africa to bear the cost. Now, if you're looking at the study of the National Income Dynamics Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey, it tells you that it's actually mostly men who are benefiting from that grant, 55% of them.
Well, that's true. The fact that it's 55% of men that claimed that grant means it's 55%. It is some families that got that grant. And then that 45, let's not discount that 45% that happened to be women and girls. There are two issues. The one is, will the grant reach people? The very same NIDCREM study shows that the grant did reach a lot of the people that needed to be reached. And the study also shows where the gaps were and how we need to fix those gaps. Then the second question is, where will the money come from? We do know that we are under financial distress, but we are not that kind of nation that is going to say when we're under financial distress, the people we're going to throw under the bus are the poor, because they're going to throw us under the bus as well. I was speaking to a colleague of mine who was a social worker during apartheid. She was in exile, and she was talking that one way of toppling a government is withdraw a benefit in times of distress. So if this government wants to topple itself, it must withdraw this grant. So that's just one thing, is about a destabilizing thing, that you can't in the middle of a pandemic withdraw this grant. Zwelinzima says the pandemic is still with us. Even if the pandemic was gone, the aftershock would still be with us after the pandemic is gone. However, we're not saying this grant should be there forever. As we ease this grant out, we have to look at how do we ensure some kind of sustainability? How do we help people to go into food gardens and in other ways of just earning a basic way of living?
Yeah. So, Nzima, I'll bring you back in here. I mean, is that a real threat that violence will increase when this grant is stopped, or are we just merely scaring government with that?
No, we're not scaring. I mean, for government, just consider this. In our view, we are already at the point of ethnicities. South Africa is every day risking an implosion. When you have almost 80% of your young people unemployed, when you have unemployment rate amongst women now up way above 50%, when almost 50% of the population, if not more, is unemployed, when poverty now afflicts up to 70% of your population, or almost 70% of your population living below a mere 1,200 rands, you are already risking an implosion at the same rate or same scale as we saw in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, worst of all in Syria, We don't want to follow that route in South Africa. That's why we think that the cost of not doing anything, the cost of just cutting these grants at the end of this month is far more outweighing the cost of an implosion to the politics, to the economy, and the social fabric of our country. So that's why we're making a call as the civil society organizations, do something now instead of taking a risk that you may not control when that implosion happens.
Zwelinzima, Vavi, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us tonight. Advocate Thuli Madonsela, we thank you for your time as well tonight.